So, hi, Michael. What was your first computer?
So the first computer that I actually owned at home was a Pentium 100. It was custom built, so we had someone that our family knew who built it for us, put it together. I think it had 16 meg of RAM and a 1.2 gigabyte hard drive.
And why a custom build?
You know what? I don't know. My dad knew this person and
Mhm.
convinced him that this was the way to go, I think.
Okay. And what was your first action with the computer?
So I mainly just used it for. There were games on there, a few game demos that came with it, some CD-ROM.
Mhm.
I would occasionally use a local BBS to use an online text. There was like a text game that a friend of mine and I would play. It was kind of like a dungeon type game.
Okay. So, okay. And you started in one point of programming or scripting or batch programming, whatever you call it. So, what was your next? What is your favorite game on the computer? Because BBS text game, I can imagine.
Yeah, at that point, I think the computer wasn't very powerful. So, I mean, it was powerful enough at the time, but as new games kept coming out, I wasn't able to play them quite as well. But I think at first I liked that game quite a bit. It was online. I was able to interact with other people.
What was the name of the game?
It was called Vallhalla MUD, I believe. So,
Vallhalla, okay.
Yeah, MUD. So I think MUD stands for multi-user done.
Okay.
So, you type east, west, north, south, and you walk around and fight creatures and earn gold and things like that.
Okay, and was it graphical or there was like just text-based?
Just text.
Okay. Okay, and there was this server somewhere? So there was like a state machine, a huge state machine in how to imagine such a game? I mean, back then, you say BBS. BBS is kind of, I don't know, a custom protocol for chats, I would almost say, or for email, something like this, right?
Right. Well, with the BBS was the way that we would connect with the modem. And then I think once you were on there, once you were connected to that, you would telnet some server.
Ah.
And I have no idea where it was or.
Okay, so there was a telnet based game. Okay, so this makes sense. Okay, there was a kind of a process which changed the state, I guess. Okay, almost serverless, if I think about that.
Yeah, it was serverless for me, I think.
Yeah, and what was you kept playing on Pentium or you started programming? So what was the transition from gaming to programming?
A program, it didn't come till quite a bit later. So at school we had some pretty out of date Apple IIs. So this was probably the early mid 90s. We were doing a little bit of basic on Apple IIs, and all I really remember about it was creating some trivial graphics on the screen and maybe a little bit of looping and things like that. But the programming experience that I had didn't really get too involved until I started college. So maybe another 9 years after that.
And you enjoyed, or were you more forced with the Apple IIs? So, I mean, were you excited about programming at school, or you had to program at school?
I did really enjoy it. In fact, it was, the whole class, all of my classmates, everyone was taking this background in programming course. So it was maybe 30 minutes once a week.
Okay.
So we never really had the opportunity to get very, involved or do anything too complicated.
And you kept programming at home, or was just the school assignment?
It was really just a school, unfortunately. So that's probably one of my biggest regrets, was never really taking it outside of that. It just never occurred to me that this is something I could do.
Okay.
In my own.
So now I'm curious, what you did then in your leisure? So I don't know. So as a young boy, so what was your leisure then? You did some sports, or I don't know.
Well, it was video games, I think. So, but it never turned into programming at that point.
Video games on your computer, or you had a console like, I don't know, Atari or something like this?
I had at that time a Sega Genesis.
Ah, okay. So this was the fault of the Sega. Without a Sega, you would start to program earlier, I think. Okay. What was your favorite? What was your favorite Sega game?
I really liked, back then I really liked the Sonic the Hedgehog games. Those were pretty fun, and I liked some role playing games. There were a few. I think one of the ones I really liked was called Shining Force 2.
Shining?
Shining Force 2.
Okay. Is this somehow related to the Stephen King novel, or no?
It's not. It's completely unrelated.
Okay, I think this is somehow interesting. Okay, so then what you studied? So you started to study computer science?
When I started college, I initially started the first the first year I started out studying like chemistry. I was thinking I would go into medicine or something like that.
Okay.
But, after the first set of courses, I talked with my counselor, and he said, based on what I said to him, he said, why don't you try a computer science class? So I said, okay. And, within the first couple of days, I knew that this is what I had to do.
Okay.
So I switched majors and just kept going with that. And that's the rest is history, I guess.
The rest is history. So, but
yeah.
what, okay. So which programs you wrote at the university or at college? So and which programming languages you learned then? Because I assume from your youth, you only knew BASIC, Apple II BASIC. So you had. So what was your first programming language at college?
So in that introductory course, we did C. It was all in C. Learning data structures, just your typical intro to programming course, I suppose. So we did that for a couple of courses, and then we moved into, I believe it was 6800 assembly.
Okay.
And, that was kind of a hardware course where you would learn, how things were structured physically within the machine. And then, using assembly language is, so much closer to that. So it helps you get a better understanding. And after that, I don't remember if Java came first or if Visual Basic. It may have been Visual Basic. So, obviously going from assembly to Visual Basic is quite a leap. And it's a very different experience.
So you enjoyed the experience, or were you shocked, or what was your reaction to Visual Basic if you knew assembly?
I was surprised that you could do it. On the surface, you could be productive with it because you're creating GUIs, all these actions that the button clicks and, the handlers and things like that. But at the same time, it seemed like there was some magic going on where, you're coming from assembly where you do everything, and then, you're in this environment where the screens are just there based on, you draw them. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think you just draw them and assign handlers and things like that.
So you enjoyed it somehow?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And I think simultaneously to that, actually, now that I'm talking about it, I think we also had a Java course at the same. So we were introduced to those two higher level languages.
Okay, and what is the reaction to Java then? Because Visual Basic is completely different. And Java is a little bit closer to C, I would say, right?
It is. So the syntax is a lot more like C. When we did C, it was usually just, a single main.c with several functions inside of there. So it was kind of a newer experience having like multiple files. So you had to compile each Java file into a class. I don't recall if we just did it one at a time or if we actually did some more complicated compilation techniques. But, there wasn't Maven, there wasn't Ant, there wasn't anything beyond just the command line.
Yeah, and came later. I think around 2000 or something we got Ant, and Maven was 2 or 3 years later. And you started to program, in your leisure, or was just college for you?
I think the coursework took up enough time, and I wasn't really doing anything just as a hobby yet at that point.
So after your university, you start to work on what?
So I started in an insurance company, and I was in the EDI department. So what we did there was every day we would receive these large files containing health insurance claims and things like that, and we'd have to translate those into the format expected by the mainframe to actually process those claims. So it wasn't using any Java at that point. We were using a commercial EDI translator package, and there was a lot of glue code around that needed to be written to move files around. So there was, Perl scripts. I think it was like K shell scripts. It was running on AIX, and we were using Oracle, and we had to, FTP the files back and forth. And there was some custom mapping software that we used where it wasn't quite drag and drop, but it was, there was some if-else type logic you could put in there, but it was a proprietary language.
And EDI is, I think, electronic document interchange or data interchange. Is it document or data? You know it?
Data.
Data interchange. And there was ADI and FACT, right? So there was on this ADI FACT, there's also a format or protocol or something like this?
Well, in fact, at this point, I got pretty interested in EDIs. It's just a data format. So within the EDI universe, there's X12, which is the ANSI standard, and then what you're saying is Edifact, and I believe that's like the UN standard. So they're slightly different from each other. There's different control structures in how you lay out the transactions, but they're very similar. Other than that,
and why you like EDI, or why you liked back then EDI? So what fascinated you?
I think the thing that really struck me was, or I guess I thought it was cool that you have this. You have this specification about a file format, and you could just go read that specification. In some cases, you have to pay to get the spec, but depending on the industry. But you can just implement it, and you're following the standard, and you can talk to other people. You can exchange this information. So I thought that was really neat.
Okay, so this reminds me. I was in a project once in a company. They were like Java starters, and they had to integrate something, and because I said, okay, what would be the best way, to integrate the external resource with transactions and stuff like that? And I said that there is something like it's called JCA, Java Connector Architecture, as well defined and well specified, but it's a bit complex. So take a look on that. And I think 3 weeks later, they called me and they told me, this is the greatest thing ever. It's like, why? Yeah, because, they just implemented the interfaces and it is working. I say, yeah, this is crazy because you are a Java beginner and you managed to implement JCA connector, which is told on conferences that is actually quite complex. So this was interesting, right? Because from the beginner's minds, so if you see the spec and you just implement it step by step, you are done. If you're a little bit lucky, it will work, right?
Exactly. Yeah, as long as you follow the contract. Right?
Yeah. And so is it still useful, the EDI, or is it like it's over?
Oh, it's definitely alive and well, I would say. So it's still heavily used in the U.S. in the health insurance. I think, in shipping and it's so embedded in these industries that I don't, even though there's better, more easily developed technologies available now, I think it's going to be here for quite a while.
Okay, so what's the competitor of EDI then? So you say there are other technologies. So if you don't like to use EDI, what do you would use then?
I guess just like a XML or JSON.
Okay.
The new flavors of data formats.
And how to imagine EDI? So let's say, what is EDI Hello World?
Well, in EDI you have these basically each. Let me start over. There's some control information in the file that explains this is who the data is from, this is who the data is being sent to, and then there's sequence numbers, dates and times, things like that. And then, so there's several levels of envelope information, and then within that there's transaction information, and the transaction is predefined by the standards, and there's several hundreds of these transactions that are defined. So you can't just send arbitrary information, really. You're really you're sending a health claim, or you're sending an acknowledgement. So there's certain structures that are dictated by the standards that these transactions have. So I don't know that there's necessarily a hello.
No, but yeah, I would imagine if there's a training course or the very first day, there will be something like an order or something. This is for me like very first thing, like hello world, right? I know it. I think from SAP, right? SAP is also using Edifact. So some, of course, they are using, but interesting. So, and you kept working for the company, just digging deeper and deeper to Edifact.
Well, I was there for 9 years, and I did several different things actually. So, I worked with the EDI department for maybe 3 years, and then I moved to a different area within the IT department, dealing with the scanning of the paper. The paper claims that we would get. So it was basically the opposite. So EDI received the electronic version, and then the other side would receive paper ones, scan them, use OCR to extract the actual detail off of those images. So I didn't work with the OCR part, but I did work with an area in that department where we would generate images from the electronic data. And that data was loaded into a system called FileNet, which you may have heard of before. It's just a content management system, and you could look at this claim as if it was a paper image or an image of the paper.
Okay.
And that programming was all done in COBOL. So I got into mainframe programming and batch jobs and things in that area.
So you started with Basic, then Visual Basic, C assembler, Java, then K shell, and then COBOL.
Yeah, all part of it.
Okay. And you enjoyed it. What was your reaction to COBOL, actually?
At first, I didn't quite understand the syntax. There were, coming from, like I took things quite literally. So when you're moving data around or copying data around in a COBOL program, there's a move statement, I believe. Mm-hmm. You move one field to another one. And for some reason, I took it quite literally that the data would no longer be present in the source field that you're moving it from.
Okay.
But, after I got past like these, the little nuances of the syntax, mm-hmm. I think I did start to appreciate COBOL as a capable language. So mm-hmm. I'm probably the only person you'll ever hear say that. But it's, I appreciated it for what it was, I think. Yep. And, I did enjoy it. I don't think I've ever run into a programming environment I didn't learn to appreciate.
Yeah, I've worked a lot with the backend or host developers. They always appreciated a PL1, RPG, or COBOL. So if mm-hmm. you know the language well, and they were always fast. What they really liked is the performance, because on the mainframe everything is tightly integrated. Everything runs mm-hmm. in the same memory. So this was, and the IDE is also integrated. So what I saw, they always worked, inside the green screen. So there was no disconnect between the source file and the machine.
Yep, ISPF editor, I think it is what that's called.
Yeah, exactly. and yeah,
it's even just the job, the batch definition mm-hmm. language, JCL. I always thought it was pretty cool how you could make small adjustments to the way your files are defined mm-hmm. and have these massive impact on the performance of how things run. Just specifying block sizes and extents to files and things like that. Just really, mm-hmm. you really had to know what you were doing.
And you tried to introduce Java, or was it like hopeless? So because on mainframes it was very fashionable to run Java in one point of time. So what I remember, mm-hmm. we ran CTG, Common Transaction Gateway, with Java. So there were attempts back then to to run Java on mainframe, yeah, or to migrate the or actually at least expose the transactions to Java environments.
Mm-hmm. Well, we never really. I mean, it was constantly talked. We mm-hmm. there was so much code in COBOL. How do we migrate this into Java mm-hmm. so it could be supported long term? And I'm sure those conversations are still happening. Mm-hmm. But Java was never. The problem with that is on the mainframe. There's a lot of people that have. I think they're used to maintaining the system as is, and there's not a lot of room for experimentation. Mm-hmm. It was almost impossible as a developer so even just trying out Java or installing it, I wouldn't even have known where to begin, Mm-hmm. So that never really happened, but there was a lot of Java programming in the distributed environment that accessed, the mainframe information through DB2 and also MQ, so that there was Java development, just not on the mainframe.
Exactly. So the MQ was often used as an integration point. So what I remember, what we did, we used MQs to send messages to the host, and there was like encapsulated transaction protocol. So the messages were not like events and more like commands. And these commands were extracted and executed on the host, and the host did something, so executed transaction, and we get the result back in a different queue. It was also a queue. So, and we listened to the queue and did something with it. So to remember, this was like an early hack, how to communicate with the host. Because we were not allowed to use the host directly, because sometimes, the databases were not designed that way that you can interact with them via JDBC. So they could become inconsistent. So they were only accessed via, for instance, PL1 triggers or COBOL triggers or stuff like that. Yeah,
we did that. And we did access the database directly.
Oh, okay.
And there were a decent number of COBOL store procedures as well. Mm-hmm. So, it just basically encapsulated logic, I guess. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, when you're running code in DB2, there's a cost associated with that. On the
exactly
there's a cost with everything on the mainframe, I think, as far as like MIPS and how much CPU you're using.
Which is back now in the clouds, right? So all the serverless and Lambda is everywhere is a cost associated with the invocation. The longer the invocation takes, the more you have to pay. So we had that 20 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Just on-prem, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So, and in one point of time, you were back to Java, or just kept cranking COBOL code, or what happened?
So I did get back to Java. So I switched teams again to.
Okay.
It was still within the claims department, but it was dealing with basically interacting with third parties. And we were developing a web application that would allow some of our employees to make modifications to these claims, as they're in the middle of being processed. So it was a green screen application that we were migrating to use Java. So that was really my first experience with application servers and
I assume WebSphere, right?
Yes, of course.
Because it's IBM. So you mentioned already MQ and AIX. So I think, okay, then I guess it's going to be WebSphere.
Right. And, we were using the IDE was
Visual H for Java?
WSAD 5.0, I think, or something. So.
WebSphere Application Developer Studio. And this was the successor of Visual H for Java. So I used the Visual H for Java, and WSAD was Eclipse-based. So Visual H for Java was a migration from Smalltalk, was the first one. And WSAD, and there was the Enterprise Edition and the Standard and Professional, I think. It was like Eclipse with plugins, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I had experience with Eclipse, just regular Eclipse in school. So I was a little familiar with, WebSphere. But it was very slow on my desktop.
Yeah, it was always slow. And so around, I would say, 2000 to 2003, what I did in lots of companies, no, it was later, maybe 2003 to 2005 or something. So I was in several projects where we replaced WSAD with plain Eclipse with Xdoclet, for instance. We just drop all the plugins and focus on standards, and we could increase significantly, the performance and the developer performance and productivity. So because you only used Eclipse for editing, so there was no plugins involved, and the deployment happened outside. And this increased actually productivity a lot, and my clients were stunned that if we remove the commercial plugins, the productivity can be increased, which was crazy back then, right?
Right, for sure. And I always try to make the argument, hey, why don't we just Eclipse?
Yeah.
Usually because the supported version of it was several years behind, and it was much slower.
Yeah.
And you could use, even with the plugins on the newer version, much easier to use. Better developer experience. So,
so you probably wrote application on WebSphere, I guess, as servlets or struts even, which talked via JMS and MQ to the backend, and you did something with the data, right?
Right. So it was allowing them to do CRUD activity on these claims, and it was using JDBC pretty much exclusively at that point. Yeah, but you're right, servlets, JSPs on the front end.
Okay. And you enjoyed the experience? No, it was too slow. So you wanted, to just use Eclipse plain, but you couldn't, right?
Right. It was very controversial to use anything other than IBM. Yeah.
So right. and what happened then? So you stick with the department, and you wrote the WebSphere CRUD applications?
Pretty much. And I did move to different areas that supported different different aspects of the claim processing, but it was all using the same stack, servlets and JSPs, and we did use struts. I don't believe we never got to the point where it was like APIs in the back end and JavaScript front ends, and that was just starting to come about, or at least I was starting to become aware of it around that.
So when you did something else, so when you stopped using servlets on WebSphere and did something else with Java, was it a breaking point in your career, or what's? So
when I started, I left that company and I moved on actually after that, and we started to do, some API work at the next, my next job. So, and even then I started to experiment. It was around the time where the batch interfaces or the batch standard became part of Java EE. So there was some applications I worked on that would do some batch processing, and you could interact with it with APIs on the front end.
So you actually used the Java EE JBatch specification?
Yes, I did. Yeah, and I think I found some bugs and contributed those upstream or some bugs.
Okay, interesting. Because I never used it. So my clients ask me sometimes about batch. So, okay, if the batch doesn't have to be restarted and we can just use executor service or something simpler than this. And I never had the opportunity to actually use the batch processing really. So were you happy with that? You had to use it, or was it? So what is the killer use case for JBatch on Jakarta batch? So what is the killer use case from your perspective?
Well, we had these. I'm sure you could do this other ways. We had these large files that we needed to basically split into individual transactions and load them every day. So what attracted me to the batch JSR was basically you can have if I remember correctly, there's like splitters, and you can run things in parallel in chunks, and you could have each chunk can have checkpoints. So, there were occasionally errors in this. What this allowed you to do was, roll back a chunk and reprocess it, X number of times. And then in parallel, you're still processing other, pieces of the file. So I thought that doing it using the batch standard was preferable because it's managing all the threads and you're really just specifying the code to run each chunk.
So you enjoy the DSL-like experience where you can say, okay, declaratively split and repeat it X times if it doesn't work on error, and you just use the capabilities of the framework. Okay, got it. And was it a different company? Was it a different company, right?
Yes, that was at a bank, so a regional bank in the U.S.
And it was still WebSphere?
That was WebSphere as well.
Okay.
And I was there for a few years, basically working on that, and then I switched to another company, and that's where I got involved, or that's where I finally got the chance to use a different server.
Which one?
They were using Wildfly at that job.
Wildfly. So it was already 2007, 2008, something like this.
Oh, this is 2016 actually.
Okay, so even later. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
5 years ago, okay. And what you did with Wildfly?
They were running an application on there to allow truck companies to interact with this service garage. And basically, it was at that point where I was really starting to learn a little bit more about how these application servers are together. And I was a tech lead on that team, and I was trying to push for migrating some of our applications into using Wildfly and using the Java EE standards, really. So we were on that Wildfly, we were running Spring. And it was, Spring is very embedded in a lot of places, I think, at least what I've seen. And I think a lot of developers think that it's really the only way to develop nowadays. And from what I've seen, it's a lot of people are maybe not as familiar with the newer versions of Java EE. So I was trying to convince that we needed to just clean that kind of thing up. And, we were developing APIs there as well, some of which were SOAP, and some of the newer stuff we were developing using Jackson.
Okay, so interesting, because you spent some time with WebSphere and you then moved to a company who uses Wildfly, and you still like Java EE. So that's interesting, right? So you are not burned by the slowness of WebSphere. Usually what I hear, that Java EE is slow, and what people thought back then that Java EE is equal WebSphere. So if
right.
and you say, okay, this is not the fault, of the spec. It's more like the problem of the runtime, and you can be very productive with Wildfly. This is what I understood, right?
Right, exactly. And the development experience was much better. The less stuff you throw into your application, the better your experience is, I found. So, anytime people complain about the application's slow or the server's slow, usually it's, from what I've seen, it's a scanning issue when Spring scanning thousands of classes, or your dependencies or you're adding dependencies you don't really need, things like that.
One question: why Spring and Wildfly were used together? So I saw this also a couple of times. I never got the idea why such a thing. I mean, why to do that? Because you could run Spring standalone, which is understandable, or you can run Wildfly standalone, which is also okay. But running both is just a little bit crazy for me. It always was. So what were the reason to use Spring together with Wildfly?
That decision predated me, so I can't answer why they did that. I always wanted to separate those two.
But for what Spring was used? Because the Java and Spring were very, very similar. So I mean, there was some overlap. So were there like areas just for Spring and other areas were solved with Java E, or what was the the architectural decision there?
No, it was also, so it was basically just using Wildfly as the servlet container. So
as Tomcat. Okay,
yeah,
so Wildfly was misused as Tomcat. Okay, yes, but this was even worse, right? So this is And and you managed to clean it up, or was it like lost fight?
It was kind of a lost fight, unfortunately.
Okay.
It was never worth the effort, to do that, because the business doesn't see any change. It's just it's all technical.
Yeah, and what happened then? So you stick with the company. You left the company. So what was the story then?
Well, I ultimately did leave, but while I was there, working with Wildfly, that's kind of when I got exposed to the MicroProfile environment. So, I knew that Wildfly was supporting certain aspects of it, and I wanted to use additional ones. So Wildfly at that point was not supporting OpenAPI. And one of the things we wanted to do was, document all of our applications using OpenAPI. And instead, some of the other developers wanted to just pull in the Swagger jars. And I said, hey, let's not do that, because I know eventually Wildfly is going to support OpenAPI MicroProfile. So let's just use an implementation of that, and we can use the standard.
Okay.
So, naturally, I used the SmallRye implementation for that. And as I was trying to integrate that, I ran into a few differences between what Swagger was generating. So I actually started getting involved in the SmallRye project at that point. And
okay. So you're a committer. You're a SmallRye committer?
Yes.
Okay, they knew that. And OpenAPI or other specs as well?
OpenAPI primarily. I did some work early on with the JWT stuff as well. So we wanted to use that, for OAuth in our applications, and it was kind of difficult to integrate that. There was no direct integration path just using the line. So I added a Java security HTTP authentication mechanism into the SmallRye implementation. So it made it much easier to just drop it in. And, several months later, it officially became part of Wildfly anyway, so it wasn't as useful long term, but, it got us going initially.
I have one question, because now I have an OpenAPI expert here. SmallRye OpenAPI MicroProfile expert. So what I tried to do last year, actually, what you can do, you can write like, how it's called, and the interceptor, which gathers the metadata information with OpenAPI as part of the MicroProfile spec. So I forgot the actual name. And
the filter, maybe? You mean
the filter, exactly. And what you can do, you get the metadata, you get the which was gathered, but you don't get the model. But there is, to my knowledge, I tried that, but then I couldn't get the reference to the class where the model comes from. And why I wanted to do this? Because let's imagine you have a JPA entity, let's say, with bin validation annotation. So what I wanted to do is to reuse the bin validation and generate OpenAPI annotations. Or, OpenJet, not annotations rather than the model, because for annotation it's too late. So I would just map the bin validation annotations to OpenAPI. And last year it was not possible. So I forgot actually to ask at the community. I just stopped working. So, it's not possible, not a problem. Of course, what I already thought to do is to use class for name and just load the class outside, but this is not a good solution. So, you know what I mean? Is it possible now, or is it like not possible at all? Because my thinking was, if the filter, it gets the metadata from somewhere, it would be nice. And usually in OpenAPI, this is a class with annotations. So it would be nice to be able to access the class. So I could even get more information. I could just use reflection to scan the class. Right.
So you're right about as far as the class for name. That's probably the only way. And the reason being is, I know in some of your projects you're probably using Quarkus or Wildfly. So the annotation scanner doesn't actually look at the classes, the class annotation index data. So if you've heard of the Jandex project, At the point we're scanning the annotations, that we're not looking at the classes at all.
That's a very good answer. So it means you don't actually have the reference to the class, right?
And,
so that's a problem.
Even if we did, it wouldn't be in the model itself. Even if you look at the class, get the information from the annotations, move on.
No, you are right. But the filter, via the filter, you could get the reference to the class, not through the model, but rather give me the context, and you have the context. It's similar to in JPA. If you really want, you could get the reference to the connection, for instance, right? It is also not meant to be that way, but you can ask entity manager to get, I think, the delegate, and then if you know that it's a delegate, you can ask for whatever. So, but yeah, okay. But this now I get it. So this was but it could be optional, right? So you could implement something like get information source or metadata source, and in case you have it, you will get a class. If not, it will be null. So this could be doable, for instance.
And a lot of times the challenge is the schema you have at the point you're looking at the filter. There's different ways that the information can get into that OpenAPI model.
Yeah.
There's a static file. There's a reader that you can implement code to actually generate it yourself.
Yeah, but let's see. Well, what you can have, the information source could return either a file or a reader or a class.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah.
Because you could have get information source and you get something object back, and then you can see whether it is useful to you or not. And in case of Whitefly, you will get somehow the Yandex representation, however it looks like, because it would be also okay to give me all the annotations of the class, right? So not only the OpenAPI, also the other annotations. This would be also a solution, but this is even harder. Yeah, but no, it was just a size. Yeah.
I was saying in small, right? So you were looking for bean validation.
So what I did, I had a JPA entity with a view. OpenAPI annotations, also bean validation annotations, and you could use the bean validation on JAX-ORS endpoints. And I said, okay, it would be nice, dry, to be able to reuse the annotations and generate from bean validation annotations, not null and size and so forth, OpenAPI annotations because they are similar. And the obvious way to do is with the filter. But as I said, in the filter, I just got the model, but I didn't got the model source. So whatever I got, I already knew, but I was interested in the bean validation annotations. And for me, there was no clean way to get them except class phoname, which is a little bit brittle and not nice. Well,
yeah, we do scan the bean validation. So if you have a bean or a POJO that is imparted, it's picked up by the annotation scanner. If you put not null on there, the bean validation annotation, it will flag that as not null.
Okay.
Now, when
you scan this, when it happens?
It's all part of the same scan.
Okay, and did it work last year already? You know it, or is it recently?
It depends. It's possible it was not implemented for the parameters, the endpoint parameters.
Okay. This could be an explanation. Okay, but if you already recognizing the bean validation annotations, this is what's enough for me. So perfect. Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry for the excursion to bean validation at OpenAPI. I actually didn't knew that you are a committer, a Smallride committer, an OpenAPI committer. So you quit the company then, right? So you started, you worked with Whitefly a bit, and you used OpenAPI to replace Swagger. Mm-hmm. And what was the story then?
Well, it was, eventually became time to move on. Okay. About a year ago, and I went back to my previous employer for a few months. I wanted to, try some architect work.
Okay.
There, and that it didn't interest me as much as I was hoping it would, or would rather. And probably 3 months ago, I was in communication with some of my colleagues on Smallride. I made a switch to Red Hat within a couple of months. Yeah.
So you are working for Red Hat right now?
Yep. It's been about a month and a half. So.
Oh, nice! And you are working on OpenAPI, or what you're doing?
I'm working on a new product that's it's basically managed Kafka on OpenShift.
Oh, okay. Very
It was
interesting.
just announced about 10 days ago.
Okay. Yeah. Even better. So the JSON API is the past, right? So you're no more interested in JSON API.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think it's we haven't really talked about that much, but I did a few side projects, just small websites for outside of my professional work, and what happened was you noted in your AirHacks TV that it was developed as part of Ember. So I was using Ember front ends, and I kept finding myself creating the same back end code over and over. And Ember, of course, uses JSON server. So at that point, I started extracting that logic server side to, intercept or to handle those requests, to validate them, and to interact with the database. And that's where that library, the RVP, the REST Validation Persistence Library. So what really I liked about JSON API was, it was being used by Ember, which was front-end framework I was using, and B, it was just a bunch of decisions. It decided for you a bunch of decisions that you don't need to make. How to do paging, how to define your entities across the wire, things like that. So a lot of times in projects, you have to keep every new project you need to design. Just was another design decision.
And about the history, so you, in one point of time, you pinged me as a question, I think, at the AirHacks TV. The first question is how you found out about the AirHacks TV. So this is like, so how you found it? You remember that?
It was probably just searching on YouTube, and it came up, looking for stuff. I think it was by coincidence.
So because you asked something like, what is my opinion about JSON API? And I took a look on that, and I was surprised that it was actually created by Yehuda Katz, and the Yehuda is also behind Ember and probably 100 others popular JavaScript frameworks. So really bright guy. And the JSON API looks like standardization of the, how to call it, DTOs, right, over the wire format. And this is clean and understandable. So you have relations, you have the entities, and it reminds me on, OData?
Yes.
So it is similar, but
I haven't done too much with it, but I am familiar a little. Yeah.
So OData is ugly, I would say, but it comes from Microsoft, and this is OData is more like how to expose database directly, and this JSON API is more like just about the DTOs. So it's not as complete as OData is, I would say, right?
Well, it does define, how your URL should look, what query parameters you
exactly.
Join data together.
You're right. But this is, you're right. But they are describing the JSON API from the point of view of the DTO author, I would say. And the OData is described more from the service perspective, I would say. So if you look at the OData specification, so you will find the URIs first, and then what is passed over the network. And if you open the JSON API, you will find the JSON format first, and if you read the JSON format, you will find the URIs. So it's interesting. So this is why the assumption was that the JSON API is focused on JSON, and OData is focused on REST API. Yeah, on REST API actually. So this is but they are similar, and of course GraphQL is also somehow related to this family, right? So we have JSON API, GraphQL, and OData.
Right, and I think there's others too. But the thing that I found interesting about JSON API is I think you said it yourself. It's pretty readable. You can instantly know what's happening when you at a URL or at a payload request or response.
And what you wrote a runtime which is able to generate the JSON API.
Well, it's basically it's a layer that sits on top of JPA, bean validation, and JAX-RS. And what it does is you give it a list of JPA entities that you'd like to expose, and it's gonna do the work of looking at those entities, and basically it has the code in there to serialize them, deserialize them, validate them, things like that.
So you could use EmberJs and a MicroProfile run, or MicroProfile Jakarta, because you need JPA runtime, or Quarkus would probably also work, right? Quarkus, Whitefly, or Helidon would work out of the box.
Right, I think so. I primarily used Wildfly in most of my testing because that was what I was. But yeah, I don't see why you couldn't use it with any of those frameworks.
So
now, the one problem with Quarkus might be there is reflection going on.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So it's not. Maybe if I had an extension, that would work.
But now you're at Red Hat, so you have enough time, to migrate it to Quarkus, right?
Yes, exactly.
So it means, so it really means if I have the JPA entities, I could use your runtime and I get an Ember compatible layer.
Correct. And, you could use that JSON API from any JavaScript as well. So one of the features I added in there was to, in addition to generating the endpoints, it will generate a small JavaScript file that has the endpoints and serialization code. Basically, it's wrappers of the fetch API. And then you can get and retrieve your JavaScript objects using those.
So it's pretty usable. So because then why is it usable? Because the JSON API is very readable. So if you have it, you can immediately call it. There's actually nothing to document. It's very, very readable. So if you go to the JSON API spec, you will find immediately an example of articles, I think, and authors. And if you read it, it is immediately self-documenting, I would say. Right?
Yep, I agree. Definitely.
And you're maintaining the library still, or?
I change it when I need to for my own. I'd be more than willing to if there's anyone that's interested in using it or finds problems with it. That's I'm happy to fix bugs and things.
What are your needs? So you're still working on something in your leisure, or what are your needs? You say.
Well, I had a couple of side projects that I was using it for. And one project I actually still have going on some EDI stuff. So I wanted to build a translation system.
Okay.
And that had a REST API and a UI. I was using the JSON API library to support that.
And this is Xlate project, right?
Yep. So that organization is where I keep my projects in GitHub.
So you are maintaining the Xlate libraries as well.
So there's not. I mean, as far as like development and innovation, it's there's not a whole lot going on like that. But it's if people are using those libraries,
but
particularly
what I recognize, you're also offering a product. So what is the product about?
So it's my marketing skills are not too good. So it hasn't been very successful. But it's a server that you would use to translate and track. So it's using another library that's open source in that Xlate organization called Steady. And Steady is basically it does for EDI what Stacks in the JDK does for XML. So it's a streaming reader and writer, and does validation and things like that. So this server is built upon that, and it has a database, and it'll track history of your EDI files and generate acknowledgments for files that you are receiving inbound.
It's like CMS for EDI?
Kind of. Think of it as like an online validator.
Okay, EDI validator.
It doesn't store the data. It's assuming that once you convert it to a different format, it needs to go somewhere else, like SAP or your database. Okay,
perfect. So what I would suggest is that we meet again and talk about Managed Kafka.
Oh yeah. I'm sure I'll have a lot more that I learn in the meantime.
So, as a cliffhanger, what is the name of the project, Managed Kafka at Red Hat?
So the name in the announcement is Red Hat OpenShift Streams for Apache.
Red Hat OpenShift Streams for Apache Kafka. So this was the longest name I heard. In the past we had Whitefly, JBoss, and even OpenShift, and now we have a very long name. I don't know whether it is a good sign or bad sign. Do you have any internal cool project name at least?
I don't know how much I can talk about. I haven't been there long enough to.
Okay. So the next time, ask someone. It would be nice to know, the internal project name, because the internal project names are always more fun.
Right.
Perfect.
Hopefully I can spill some more beans.
Of course. Where people can find you on the internet, a Twitter account or website, blog, whatever you have.
So I don't really use Twitter. Most of the stuff I do is related to GitHub. So if you come across any of my projects, or you find a bug, if you're using, open an issue, or you can chat, or most of the projects have my email link.
Okay. So perfect. Thank you. And I learned a lot about EDI actually.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.